Hey y'all, this lesson is on adding integers. The goal of this lesson is for you to be able to add integers quickly in your head. What I use to help you learn this is called sign bubbles. That's just what I call it. You probably will not find that in a textbook, especially at the college level, but I think it helps. So a negative sign bubble is just a circle with a negative sign. And a positive sign bubble is just a circle with a positive sign. That's all it is. So they just represent, this negative bubble represents -1, and this positive bubble represents +1. So that's all that means. And then a negative bubble and a positive bubble, whoops, sorry, negative, positive, pop because they're opposites, so they kind of undo each other. What we actually call this is inverses, or are inverses. So these are called additive inverses, which means that they have opposite signs and they're the same number. So for example, -1 and +1, they're the same number, but they have opposite signs, so they are called additive inverses. Additive means that we are adding them. And they add to 0, which is the additive identity. I've talked about this in multiplication of fractions, the multiplicative inverse and the multiplicative identity. So those are different, but same type of concept. We're using opposites, and we use these opposites to kind of undo what's being done. And then we'll later use these inverses to help us solve in future lessons. But for now, we're just going to be adding integers. And I just called this adding integers because there's no sense in really saying subtracting integers. Adding integers means that an integer is a positive, 0, or negative whole number. A whole number is like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way to infinity. So we can just say adding integers because that implies some subtraction or taking away or differences are going to be happening. So if you see 6 minus 4, that's actually 6 plus -4. In some textbooks, they just get rid of the plus and make it minus, which I'm okay with either one. They don't bother me. I grew up with this one, so that's what I'm used to writing, but you'll probably see this more often because it is a little more technically correct. So if we draw -4 bubbles, that means that there's 4 bubbles and they're all negative. So -1, 2, 3, 4. These are all actually -1, -1, -1, -1, but there's 4 of them. So -4 bubbles. And then +4 bubbles have positives, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're just adding them, we're gathering them all together. This is -4 bubbles, this is +4 bubbles. And then if we simplify the expression, -4 plus 4, I'll put my signs in here, and I use the definition of inverses, then these pop, these pop, these pop, these pop. How many bubbles am I left with? 0. So -4 plus 4 is 0, which makes sense because, whoops, sorry, -4 and +4 are additive inverses, and the sum of additive inverses is 0, which is the additive identity. So let's use that to practice some problems here. We have -5 plus 3. If you want to pause this and draw the bubbles yourself first, feel free to do that. I'm just going to draw it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. These are negative. These are positive. So how many bubbles are going to pop? 3. Well, 6. 3 pairs. I should say how many pairs of bubbles are going to pop. 3 of them popped, and we're left with -2 bubbles. So over on the far right, what is your observation? What do you see happening? Maybe pause and write this in your own words. You could say this several different ways. You could say 3 of the bubbles popped and left with 2 negative. You could say something like that. It doesn't have to be exact. You could say the negative bubbles outweighed the positive bubbles. The negative bubbles outweighed the positive bubbles by -2. That would be a really good way to say it. I think I like that second way better, but both are correct. So try number 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're all positive. 3 negative. Do any pairs pop? Yes. So 1, 2, 3 pairs pop. What are you left with? 2 positive bubbles. So you just write 2. You don't have to put a positive sign there. So our observation would be, you could put this in your own words, something that if you went back and read it, it makes sense to you. Either one, anything like the top 2 that I did would be fine, or if you said it differently but it makes sense to you and it's the same thing, that's good. I'm going to say the positive bubbles outweighed the negative bubbles by 2. Okay. The next one, you probably don't really need to draw bubbles. 5 plus 3 is probably pretty easy, but I am going to do it for the sake of the lesson. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all positive. 1, 2, 3, all positive. Do any bubbles pop? No, they don't. Okay, even though these are stacked, that doesn't mean that they pop. You have to pay attention to the signs in those bubbles. They're both positive. So they are not inverses, which means they don't pop. Which means we're left with 8. 8 positive bubbles. Nothing went away. So there were no opposite signs in the problem. It was all the same sign. So we basically just gathered up all of the bubbles into a total of 8. So we could say same signs means we gather all bubbles. Okay, last one, at least for practice with bubbles. -5, -3. Do any bubbles pop? No. So they are all negative. None pop, which means we total them up to be negative, which if you look at the observation above, I said the same signs means you gather all the bubbles. So this still stands for negative numbers. Both of the numbers were negative, so there were no inverses involved, and we just gathered them all up. So we can just repeat that down here. That's a weird arrow. You can rewrite it if you want to, but that's what it is. It's the same rule. So basically on this far right side, these are the rules that I learned. So in the first two examples where they had different signs, we ended up kind of subtracting the two numbers, and the larger number, we took that sign. So that was a lot of words. Let's look at it. Different signs, we subtracted the two numbers and took the sign of the larger number. I'm not going to make you memorize that. If you want to, if bubbles are not practical if you're dealing with really large numbers, so I would not recommend always drawing bubbles. But if you can picture the bubbles in your mind and picture them popping, then hopefully you don't have to draw them. So if you have negative 400 plus 201, you definitely don't want to draw those out. That's terrible. So you can picture the bubbles, 400, boop, 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 all the way to 400 bubbles. And then, I don't remember what I said, negative 400 plus 201. Then you're going to have 201 bubbles that pop. And what's left over is your answer. So keep that in mind for these. Pause it. Try these without bubbles and see what you get. Pause it. When you're done, hit play. You should get negative 4, positive 4, positive 16, negative 16. So we had different signs. I subtracted. I took the sign of the larger. Different signs. I subtracted. Took the sign of the larger. Same signs, add. Same signs, add. That's it. Super simple, super fast. Okay, then we have the case of a double negative. So a double negative means like a negative back-to-back. And the example I have here is if you think about a remote control and you accidentally hit the power button twice, boom, boom, it turns on and then it turns back off, which was where you started. So it kind of undoes. So when you see that double negative side by side, it actually turns into a positive. And so anytime you see that double negative, you change it to a positive. So negative 9 plus 1, positive 9 plus 1. And there's that. I went pretty fast, but hopefully at this point you're good. Okay, I have some practice problems down here. I want you to pause, try these on your own, and then hit play. You should get negative 20, negative 16, negative 20 again. Whoops, I think I missed one. Oh, sorry. There's some extras if you want to pause and try those. Sorry about that. This is negative 48, positive 48, positive 16, positive 70, negative 70, and 0. Easy peasy, right? Okay, that's all I have for this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please email me and I would be happy to help.